I'm back in the project and I actually changed the HTML code and the styles a little bit. You find all CSS files and HTML files attached, and just make sure to move the HTML files into the views folder and the CSS files into the CSS folder in the public folder. I did this to, well, change the styling a little bit and also add a little bit of additional markup which we'll use in this module, but no worries, I will walk you through all of that markup. And regarding the styling, it's just a little bit nicer to look at right now, and I also added some styling which we'll need in this module. So with that, I can of course visit the page on localhost 3000, and this is how it looks like right now. Little bit nicer than before in my opinion, but of course you can always style this to your needs. But let's now focus on the data. And right now we don't really work with data in our app, right? In admin.js, for example, we do get that data for a product here in the host route, but we just log that to the console. We're not storing it. We're not working with it. And working with it is kind of hard right now because we have no database where we could store it permanently. But one thing we can, of course, do is we can store it in JavaScript variables and see how that works and if these are then shared across incoming requests from different users. And that, of course, will hold some important learnings because you often, well, don't want to share such data. So let's see how that works before we then later in the course move towards a more permanent database-driven solution. So let's say the incoming product title, which we output here, should be stored in a more permanent place. And in general, I actually want to also add some fields to the form then later so that we can add more for a product than just the title, but step by step. So let's start storing that title which we get here. And just to bring that back to memory, right now we got this field here. And if I submit this, well, then I get this object with the key, title, and the value the user entered. So how can we store this? Well, we could add a variable where we store it in. And the first thing we could try is we could add a variable here in admin.js. Let's say we create a new constant here, which I'll name products, which is an array. And keep in mind, even though it's constant, the array can receive new elements because the array itself is still the same object. We just add or remove elements to it, but that doesn't affect the overall holding array object. So now I got my products here, and I actually want to export my products. So what I'll do down there is I will use a different syntax where I export my routes and export the router here and exports products and export my products constant. This has one important implication. Since I changed the way I export my routes, I have to go to the app.js file. And with that, in the app.js file where I import my admin routes here, well, actually, this is the admin data. And there I want to access the routes object because there will be such a routes object because I'm creating it here. So admin data refers to all the exports, you could say, and there we now have routes and products, and therefore when I do import my routes, I have to import them like this. Of course, admin data is then also something I have to change up here in the import. So now I got this adjusted, and now I got my products exported too. Products is an empty array. Now in here, in router post, let's take the products and push a new element into this array, a new object, let's say, and that object will have a title, which is the title I'm getting. So request body, and keep in mind that also is an object with a title property. So I will extract the title with the dot notation. I could, of course, just push the overall request body, since that will be an object of the exact same structure, but later I want to add more fields here, and therefore I will create a new object here. Also, to make it a bit clearer to see what's happening here. So now we're adding this to products. Now in shop.js, where we output all our products, or where we want to do that at some point, we therefore need to get access to the products. And for this, let's add an import up here. Let's import admin data by requiring admin. So this admin.js file, where we do export its routes, something we're not interested in this file, but also this products array. So now here, let's console log admin data products. So that should be the array. Now save everything, and now let's simply see what we get. If I reload this page, the shop page, I get an empty array, which makes sense because initially this is an empty array. We export it. That makes sense. So let's go to add product now, and let's add a book here, and click add product. We're back to the shop page, and we see something interesting. We see the array with the book inside of it, and that console log statement. Where is this actually coming from? Well, that is coming from the shop.js file here. You can also make this clearer by adding shop.js here and logging the product. So logging two things to make it clearer what is responsible for the output. So shop.js is logging the empty array. And now let's try outputting that book here. And now we got shop.js with the array with the book in it. Now, this is interesting to see. So we can export something, some object or array, a reference type therefore. And if we change that in the other file, it also gives us the update here. So this is interesting. This is one way of sharing data. And to be honest, we'll later use different ways because this has one disadvantage. Here, if I reload shop, we still got that in there. Now, let me open up a totally different browser. I'm in Firefox here, and I also visited localhost 3000. So this is a totally different browser, and this is kind of like a brand new user. It doesn't share any cookies with the other browser, nothing of that kind. It uses the same IP address, but that doesn't matter here. It's a brand new request as if it were made from a different machine. And you will see, I still log this. So this is actually data which is inherent to our Node server as it is running. And therefore it's shared across all users. Sometimes this is what you may want, but very, very rarely, to be honest. Actually, you will probably never implement this. You always want to fetch data for a specific request, and if that happens to be the same data you show for all users that sent this request, this is fine. But sharing this data across requests, across users, is typically something you don't want to do, because if you now added this with user A, user B will see the updated version, even though you might not want to show that. Maybe it's an edit that normally wouldn't have been saved to the database yet, so you don't want to show that to the other users yet. Maybe it's some personal data. So this is a pattern we can use for now here, and it is fine for practicing what we want to practice here, but later we'll learn about a technique to share data in memory here in the Node app, across different requests, but only for one and the same user and not across users, because now we have shared data across requests and across users. And we will later, of course, also learn how to use a database. But for now, let's stick to this approach. Let's use that for some dummy data sharing, and let's see how we can get this data into our view now.